Hey world, it's April 2nd, 2022. Looks like it's 11:24 a.m. my time, and I'm here to truth bomb the con again and again and again until hopefully it seeps in. And so, look, thanks to everybody that are, coming out of the woodwork, really championing us over the noise of people that are just really kind of not tapped in to how the world operates, and they're just really quick to judge because that's what they do, and that's what online allows us to do, and that's the playing field. So you work with what you play the cards you're dealt, right? And the river goes to whatever the way the river goes. But I thought in terms of a theme today, what I might try to connect with you guys on is that first and foremost, please go to YouTube, like and subscribe. Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con, trying to create an alternative to TikTok and grow the audience. I mean, on hashtag Patrick Lovell, we're up to almost 900,000. We're like at 1.2 million on hashtag the con, and cumulatively, we're over 4 million views on everything associated with this. Interestingly enough, I looked up my name, hashtag Patrick Lovell, and there were like 3.2 billion views. But then I scrolled down. I mean, I occupied the top, I guess thumbnails, where you see my picture all over the place. But then as you go down, you get to see like SpongeBob character Patrick, and stuff like that. So I'm like, oh, okay, that's why there was 3.2 billion. But needless to say, guys, what is my message to you? I'm trying desperately to get your attention, to make you understand that the system that we live in is one giant con job and a major grip that you don't understand. And it's big. It's got a lot of moving parts, but it's pretty easy to understand once you see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And what we've done, I'm a television producer, I'm a muckraker journalist, I'm a guy that's brought to you the truth that the New York Times, all of the major newspapers around the country, every major media platform from Fox to MSNBC to CNN never delivered, and neither did our government, from the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigations and the Securities and Exchange Commission and so forth, because they all circled the wagons to protect the system. And they protected the system by providing trillions of dollars to the bad guys that destroyed tens of millions of people in a way that nobody understands, and they've never stopped doing it. The con keeps going on and on and on. And quite frankly, everything from, World War and other things like pandemic, do a hell of a good job to make sure nobody understands how, the real power gets played, even though I think both the pandemic and a potential World War III are directly related to what it is that I continue to bring to you. And as a human being, as a guy, of what I am. I mean, if you don't know me, you don't have a feel for me, everything else. Look, I'm 53 years old. I'm from Texas originally. And, I grew up as a guy who deeply, deeply believed in the American dream and cares about principles and ethics and integrity. My family, I'm a good guy. I'm a rock and roller. I mean, I grew up with heavy metal, basically. I mean, if you're going to try to synthesize a sound that might be kind of really the most emblematic of me over the course of decades would be somewhere, from the Red Hot Chili Peppers to the Foo Fighters. And, beyond that, in terms of sports, I mean, I love all organized sports. I really love action sports, extreme sports. I spent a portion of my life pushing the limit. And, I played all sorts of sports myself. I was a football player, decent one, and all the way through high school. And then I became a rugby player after the fact. In sports I love to watch, I mean, football's top at the apex for me. I love really all sports, but I love hockey and I love rugby too. Yeah, you see a theme. I like aggression, stuff where people battle through it. And, those are sorts of elements plus my sound that give me a lot of energy to try to fight the bad guys. And there's a lot of bad guys out there. And the bad guys rule the roost. And everybody's lying to us. And they're pissing on our heads, telling us it's rain. I believe in liberty and justice for all. I believe in life, liberty, truth, and the pursuit of happiness, and all of those sorts of principles that, cannot be discounted. I mean, I've said it in many of my I'm going to call these things sermons. I mean, that's exactly what they are. But, the sacrifice of what led to the American Revolution to get King George III, and then the Civil War, and the fight to end slavery, and then ultimately World War II and D-Day and defeating fascism, and then things like the Civil Rights Movement. And all of these struggles throughout American history have been monumental, and they've forged my sort of mentality. So I'm a competitor. I believe in the dynamics of the American dream. I believe in entrepreneurialism. I believe that the best rise to the top. And I believe that, when you have a country that has a distributed mechanism of the economic engines, you create competition and you create a rising tide raises all ships. So that was always my philosophy my entire life. By the time I got to 40, I thought really I was well on my way to the American dream until I got completely wiped out by the 2008 financial crisis. And as I was digging out of the rubble, which nearly ended my life, my background educationally was I studied political science in college. And then I've had a career as a producer, but I came up in Hollywood and I worked for some of the biggest, power players in Hollywood, and I worked for major executive producers and that sort of thing. And when you put all of that, background and my understanding of how things work, I was never naive to power. I knew exactly how power could be manipulated, how power could be organized, how power can suppress people under certain circumstances for an outcome. So, like, for example, when the whole story of the Weinstein development took place a couple of years ago with Me Too movement and all that sort of thing, we all knew about that decades ago, right? And the apparatus of that system was so that Harvey could literally rape, starlets that he needed to control the outcome of their careers to be able to manipulate the outcome of how he would produce certain films. It's a gross part of the system, but it's definitely a part of the system. And, I've brought up Epstein before. I mean, when you consider Epstein, people are like enthralled with what didn't happen or did happen. And they're like, getting involved with a story that took place decades ago. And that story of Epstein is really one of the older stories of time. There are institutions, there's entities, there's intelligence, there's things that exist to try to exploit people's human nature and to get them to do things that they can get them over a barrel, right? So, for example, it's pretty commonplace to try to get someone in power like a senator involvement with a financial institution at a big party where they get hooked up with drugs and hookers, and then they get them on film, and then they can leverage them. I mean, that kind of stuff was going on in the 80s, okay? So everything that's been happening forever has been a continuation of that. But, call it my naivete. But we used to have, eventually, the long arm of the law would catch up with you. So we always knew that bad guys could do bad things and people could lie and deceit and come up with clever ways to try to pull the wool over people's eyes and to create Ponzi schemes and all other sorts of fraud, which is basically theft by deception that's organized, right? And I always knew all of that type of stuff. And so that's why in the 90s, two films really had a huge impact on me. The first was the Usual Suspects, where Kevin Spacey said the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. That means power behind the scenes can actually manipulate outcomes that if you're not aware of, you're going to get played by. And then there was this incredible line by, Ezekiel, well, the character was Ezekiel Rollins, played by Denzel Washington, in a beautiful film called Devil in a Blue Dress, which also came out in the 90s. And one of the best lines out of that film was Ezekiel saying, "I got tired of them pissing on my head, telling me it was rain. They must have thought I was kind of some kind of new fool." See, the difference between being an American to me and a lot of the other cultures throughout the world is that we're not suckers. I grew up with this sort of Bugs Bunny mentality, right? That you can figure things out and you can ask the question, "What's up, Doc?" And then, sorry to stay with the cartoon reference, but if you got character and you've got integrity and you got courage, you can channel your Popeye, to deliver, I always like to throw the Mike Tyson uppercut, to Bluto, right? Which could be, in this analogy, the system. So, that's who I am and that's what I'm all about, and that's what I was all about before this world fell on my head and took everything from me and literally destroyed my life. So I had to start pulling the threads, and it led to a miracle. It led to a miracle that me, with my team, literally did the work of the Department of Justice, the FBI, the New York Times, and everybody who failed to tell the story. And it's incrementally the aspects of the criminality that, when you take it as a whole, should have led to the implosion through what we call RICO statutes, racketeering influenced corrupt organization laws that were built for the mafia. We all know the mafia. We all know the mafia has verticals and it has its consigliaries and its lieutenants and all of the different guys that work within the machine to basically steal from everybody. And if you don't play ball, they kill you, right? But that's crime. And in a country of life, liberty, and justice for all, where the integrity of law is, at a high level, then those guys get taken down. Now, if you look back at our history, I mean, JFK and RFK, obviously their outcomes tell you a little bit, or might, create an inference of maybe who was actually in control after all. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but the bottom line is it's certainly not outside the realm of understanding how power can play behind the scenes. And I can tell you all day, every day, that the system of power, when we picked up the ball, which is really a continuation of things that happened back in the 80s, the one into the 90s. I mean, you talk about, there are things that you should know about that should be really, everybody in the country should be able to know this stuff as much as we know LeBron James, or, I don't know, Miley Cyrus, or, the Kardashians, or whatever. We should know this stuff like the back of our hand. We had what was known as the S&L crisis, the savings and loan crisis, which led to 1,000 convictions of elite white-collar criminals in the late 80s, early 90s. Then we had this, what we call the tech bubble in the 2000s, which is basically a bubble, a pump and dump scheme on stocks as it related to the stock market, and then it blew up and it destroyed that generation of investors, only to kind of reset and pick up again. That led to what we call the Enron era frauds of the 2004 era, which a lot of that sort of criminality with control fraud that utilizes accountants, professionals, and the integrity of these big firms that we all think would always act within the merits of the law, came to be just a giant con scheme, and it blew up investors and retirees and created all sorts of horrific outcomes. And we have a system supposedly of capitalism in our country, right? And capitalism is this notion that individuals can be owners of companies and they can do it for profit. Really is all it comes down to. I mean, in terms of the ecosystem, what capitalism is defined as, right? But capitalism also requires risk. The beautiful thing about capitalism, in my mind, is that if you have somebody who has a great idea, let's call it Steve Jobs and Apple, or Elon Musk and Tesla, you want to invest in that company because these guys have proven that they've got great products, that they could do great things, that you see an opportunity to invest in, because if you invest in it, then you're going to get pieces of the profits as these companies grow. And if you get in early enough, then you can have wild, growth for literally decades, which has happened. And kudos to a guy. I know there's a lot of controversy over Elon. He's a very interesting character, but it took a long time for Tesla to be profitable. And now Elon, I think, is the most wealthy man in the world, and he does questionable things. But I mean, that's the idea, the notion of capitalism. Now, in our country's history, though, that does have an underbelly and a dark side. If we start to get into monopolies, if we start to get into corruption, we can get into a situation where influence can be bought. Lawyers can write laws that benefit companies, and legislatures and politicians can literally work for these companies at the behest of the American people. So there's this major conflict, right? So the principles of the United States, of course, are life, liberty, and justice for all, that nobody is above the law, that the law is equal, but the law has to be equal to take down the big players like it would the low-hanging fruit, for it to be a society that actually is of, by, and for the people, rather than of, by, and for corruption, for example. And to be able to have that equilibrium, to be able to have something that works for the people, you have to have people in power that have insane courage and integrity, and that they're going to make the right choices more than they make the wrong choices. Nobody's going to be perfect, but what we've descended to is madness, because it literally is what we show in the con, a criminal enterprise from top to bottom. And it's all a myth, and it's all a facade, and it's all fiction. So for example, for those of you who believe in supply and demand, it's not supply and demand. For those who believe in upward mobility and that you can pick yourself up by your bootstraps, there's a lot of truth to that, but much less now than before, because we're up against this wall of this criminal empire. And this criminal empire is fueled a specific way, and it runs a specific way, and all of that is on display in the con. And you can't get to a level of sophistication to be able to understand the world you live in unless you understand the facts. And quite frankly, that's what the whole purpose of journalism was, which we call the fourth estate, before it became kind of a propaganda wing of the power, where the people inside the machine literally just pay to play and have access and tell certain stories a certain way as to not become a threat to the system. And quite frankly, that goes for all media. And that's the reason why the con is only available on our website and not on Netflix or HBO, because the system that we expose is the system that runs and operates this whole situation. Everybody's under the thumb of this. But see, this is when you go down the yellow brick road, which is what I've done for literally since I got blown up in 2008 and I started pulling the thread because I'm not a sucker and I wanted to find answers. I got more answers than I could ever in a million years have understood. But after this insane journey, what we're at right now at this moment in time is that we've got this overwhelming wall of noise in media that basically you have mainstream that's not going to ever tell you the truth because they want to basically be engaged with the power, and that's how they get paid. And there's something I'll reveal in just a moment that makes that so. So everybody in that system are lying to you. That's why we get fake media. And a guy like Donald Trump correctly said it was fake media. But Donald Trump benefited from that fake media his entire career. And, I sometimes think I'm completely torn about Donald Trump in terms of how smart he is. Because at times I think the guy is just a buffoon. I think I saw this meme a long time ago that he looked like, he was Joker, in the meme, and it was Donald Trump dressed as the Joker. And I'm like, that's who he is. But the guy's just got a sick sixth sense, if I can say that without being tongue-tied, at knowing how to play the system against itself and exploit it because of this insanity of complicity and criminality in the system that he understands. And it's a free-for-all. And the only reason that free-for-all can exist is if you can get to be a point where you've got high-level white shoe law firms working for you, you can circumnavigate the law. I mean, we've seen that my entire life. I'm 53 now, right? I mean, we've seen different parts of that, but again, society is never going to be perfect. And I'm not trying to tell you it will be if you listen to me, but it could be a hell of a lot better than it is because I really think that we've hit rock bottom. And everything that we've been in the midst of is like literally 4 decades in the making, maybe even longer. And it's coming to a head of absolute insanity because even the criminality is not hidden anymore. It's in front of our face every single day. There's no commitment. There's no, what does Paul Pelletier always say? You got to have the courage. It's just really all about courage. You have to have the courage to be able to go do the investigations to get these guys in the courts to be able to convict them. And a lot of times, attorneys, they're worried about their careers and the power structure, and they can read the tea leaves because they're very smart people. And they basically might not want to take down the bad actors because they realize the bad actors are in control and they better play by their rules. That's the system we're living in. Now, okay, if you're of the 1%, even if you're a good person within the 1%, not participating in the situation, you're benefiting from it, okay? And so what they've done is they pacified the top 10% by increasing asset values of stocks and real estate that have benefited people that have, maybe lived correctly and saved their money their whole lives and got into a position to be able to purchase assets the right way. And so therefore they've benefited from this fictional enterprise that's happening behind the scenes. But the rest of you, those who may have been like the working class that would have at one point of our country's history worked in factories, or maybe you would have been self-made and everything else, the opportunity, the dynamism, all of those things are not what they once were, okay? We basically turned into a slave society. And the myth is that we've replaced income with credit. And when you create a debt-fueled society, you basically, and I think many of you have seen, memes on this, but you create debt slavery. And that's really what it is. It just feels like, to me, it's an extension of the Confederacy or slave plantations because it has the same methodology. And it's like the fuel. In fact, one of my favorite muckraker journalist outlets did a comparison of what Wall Street was involved with slavery. I mean, I'm telling you, when you understand credit, default swaps, and derivatives and all of these so-called financial instruments, a lot of this stuff came out of the slave era, which was just based on trading and loaning against assets of slaves and the exploitation of slave labor. Absolutely insane. And to that point, quite frankly, that was like King George III's, redcoats. They were the militaristic arm of it, but the business side of it was the East India Trading Company, and they had techniques of creating smash and grab through debt suffrage, all throughout the 1700s, which ultimately led to revolutions such as ours, right? Because they were controlling the outcome. And if you want to live in a society of dynamism, of liberty, of freedom, of justice, you have to have balance, and you have to have separation of powers. You have to have an independent judiciary that is based on integrity. You have to have independent Congress based on, and there has to be outcomes and accountability for everybody in the system if that's going to happen, which is what we got rid of. It's a race to the bottom. It's literally, I mean, this confederacy of dunces, the circus, and I'm the guy that is literally screaming from the mountaintops, the emperor's new clothes. He's naked. But now I'm naked because I'm naked in front of you, just revealing my soul because I've literally had to sacrifice my entire life to get to this point, and now we've got a toehold. We're starting to build an audience. A couple of like strange jingoisms have been coming through the pipeline the last couple of days where people are feeding it back to me, where I'll say things where it's like, it's not red, it's not blue, it's true. And then if you have the truth, you're bulletproof. Those are the things that I'm trying to galvanize and I'm trying to inspire and I'm trying to get you to understand I'm the only guy that's willing to go the distance to tell you the truth of how corruption works and has basically betrayed everything we think we are. And I'll finish with this notion because this is really the most important aspect of it, right? So in supply and demand, especially in a capitalistic society, the Federal Reserve changed from the gold standard back in 1971 to what we call fiat currency. And the only reason fiat currency really could to work is because a couple of different things. One is the dollar bill became the reserve currency of the world because we rebuilt the world after World War II, because we won World War II. That came at great cost of sacrifice of blood and treasure, which was in service to liberty and justice for all, of course, which defeated fascism. Okay, so there's that. So there's ideological sort of components intermixed with what became the economic reality of it all, right? It wasn't fair to everyone, and in our country has never been fair to everyone, and it's always, that's why we have in order to form a more perfect union. But in terms of our currency and the economy and how this whole thing works, the only reason we got to be able to be a fiat currency, even though there's many around the world, I think there's 7 of them, where you have sovereign currency and you can loan against yourself and you don't have to borrow from other countries. But we're an economic powerhouse. We're still, I think, probably the biggest economic engine on the planet, even though we're still, in capacity to what we could be, not even close, right? And so ultimately, what replaced gold was literally oil. Okay, oil is a commodity that I think 75% of the global economy depends on. And, it's become extremely problematic because the swing producer, the biggest producer on the planet, is Saudi Arabia. And I've said this before too, but I'll say it again. Saudi Arabia was instrumental in, participating in whatever 9/11 became and how it became it. All the details we don't have, but it's enough to make us go, we should never have gone to Iraq. If anything, we should have gone to Saudi Arabia, but we didn't. And this is part and parcel to what I'm trying to tell you. And then ultimately, just recently, it was revealed that, in this battle between Russia invading Ukraine and all of the kind of geopolitical chess that's being played out right now, is that it looks like Saudi Arabia is entertaining the notion of trading in the Chinese yuan. And it would make a lot of sense for them, to be honest with you. But we're dependent upon oil. We're dependent upon a country, that our dollar is dependent on, that literally attacked us and created this insanity during 9/11 that I think was the first shot over the bow for what has been World War III for the last 20 years, except we don't know who the enemy is and we don't know how they operate. And that's what I'm trying to bring to your attention, primarily because 2008 was the second shot over the bow, but it was monumentally larger and catastrophic because tens of millions of people got swept up in this madness. And really what it did, and I came up with this concept the other day, but this is really the truth, okay? So what it did was it targeted financially illiterate borrowers, okay? People who have no idea how the system works. And it basically dangled free money out for them, like bait on a fish hook. And it got them involved with a situation that put them into a situation where this financial system, this insanely deceptive, three-dimensional chess, con artist, casino, did things that literally put those people who had no rhyme or reason being in a situation to be able to borrow to buy a house, because it led to this thing called ninja loans, no income, no asset. Based on loans, guys, this is just basic financial literacy. You don't loan somebody money who doesn't have the ability to pay it back. And if you do, you're going to have catastrophic consequences. But the reason we did is on display in the con, first and foremost, and there's a whole methodology to it. But for your purposes, I need you to be aware that really the most financially illiterate, let's just call it the dumbest amongst us, who would rather watch the Kardashians, who would rather maybe tap out of this life and not have any idea what they are. That would be the difference, quite frankly, between being a citizen of the United States, which means you have to be informed and you hold power account, to becoming chattel. What is chattel? Chattel is cattle, like cows or pigs being led to slaughter. That's what they were doing. So they put financially illiterate people in houses they could never afford to pay back. They put them in terms they never understood. They even did it to people who didn't understand the language. And then they did this because they were getting free money to do this where they could get fees. And I'm talking about the brokers who set everybody up to fail, which was based on illegal deceptive acts and practices. You can't lie to somebody to put them in a deal. That's against the law. That's a felony, first and foremost. But then there's a whole pipeline of what we reveal in the con that led to that. But what they did was they put these financially illiterate people into bonds that were stamped AAA by credit rating agencies, which are part of stopgaps that was owned by none other than Warren Buffett, who's everybody's favorite, uncle billionaire who, one of the top richest people on the planet who owned Moody's. And the reason why they had to get that AAA rating was because you can't sell through institutional investors to pensions, which are huge pools of money of retirees, of people who've worked their entire careers to save for retirement, for a healthy life, so that they can support their families and their grandchildren and live happily ever after. That's part of the American dream. They literally plugged these weapons of mass destruction, which, by the way, Warren Buffett had prefaced, and then they put them into pensions, and they blew them up, and they destroyed everybody. And then by the end of it, they've got everybody pointing at each other because, quite frankly, like I said this in one of my sermons recently, it's black and white. They targeted African Americans, and then they got the rest of us, like people like me, and I happen to be college educated. I was a professional, and I got into a deal that I thought that I could afford until the music stopped. And I was getting paid on something that was, I was a television producer, but I was in the real estate sort of sector that was, churning and burning from this whole situation. And then when it collapsed, I collapsed, and then I couldn't afford this house, and then I got churned and burned in this illegal foreclosure mechanism that it took me years to figure out, that millions of people have figured out, or sorry, I should say tens of thousands, but millions of people got put through the system where they were foreclosed on illegally, and that's all in the con as well, and there's more to it. But they were connected to the white working class, okay? And the white working class, got blown up as well. And so there's this evil that exists above that works behind the scenes, literally through legal, maneuverings, LLCs, limited liability companies. They can create all of these different things for bankruptcy, and they can play these games, and they can do it all for the short term because the Federal Reserve is giving these asset managers who control the whole thing free money, and then they would blow you up and they destroy your lives. That leads to homelessness or suicides or divorces and all of those other things. At the base level, they get to pick this money up on the cheap, where hyenas are actually forcing you through the meat grinder with illegal documentation fraud that our courts, that we believe in liberty and justice for all, aren't stopping, because the volume was so big that our legal system wasn't up to the challenge of being able to manage this. And what should have happened is that our Department of Justice and our Federal Bureau of Investigations and our media should have told you everything that I'm telling you. That would have led to the mass arrests through RICO statutes of all of the CEOs of Wall Street that pulled this thing off. But instead, we gave them trillions of dollars. Trillions upon trillions of dollars. And we've never stopped. And to put that into perspective, we've never done this in the history of the United States until 2009. We've done different variations that were much smaller, but we've never done it like this. It was gigantic. And so here we are. And so I continue to try to stimulate everybody who believes in liberty and justice for all, who's either been a victim or who doesn't want to be a victim, or just honest people in the system. I mean, if you're a professional, if you're a pilot, maybe you're an accountant, maybe you're an attorney, maybe a lot of you could be swept up in this stuff, but the country's so huge, many of you aren't, right? And so I'm looking for your participation as well, because they've stolen the country, and we're all in a train wreck to hell. And I don't know if this country is going to survive this. I don't know how many of us are going to survive this. It just seems like we've been able to press this further and further along until we got nothing left. And I think we're on the verge of, absolute collapse. But the system does work for some people. That's what's so crazy about it. It works for everybody above the line, and then they pacified the top 10%. I don't know what it's going to be, the ultimate, catalyst, domino that brings it all together. But I'm telling you, I'm the only guy that has ever had the courage to tell you directly exactly how this thing works. It's all on display in our work, The Con, at www.thecon.tv. I hope you'll join us, because I'm trying to create a mass civil rights movement to purge corruption. Our hashtags are failure is not an option, hashtag Exodus, hashtag truth is marching, hashtag the resurrection. Because I'm trying to uplift the downtrodden in a citizens movement to purge corruption, and we know how to do that as well, to basically fight against evil. It really is that. That's all it is. And I put my entire life on the line to do this. I've lost everything to do this. And the only thing that kind of keeps me going, to be honest with you, is the fact that I think roughly over 4 million people have viewed this, and literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, are now interacting with this in a way that didn't exist 6 weeks ago. If we can get to 4 million in 6 weeks, we can get to 20 million in, I don't know, maybe 2 months, 3 months. And if we got some portion of that who really care, which I know many of you care, you got to spread the word. You got to get on board. We got to come together, because nobody is going to save us but us, and we can help each other. But if we don't do it together, there's no way in hell we're going to be able to defeat this system. This system is insanely powerful. And I'll tell you, it's in every movie we've ever seen. It's the dark side and the light side of the Force. It's, Harry Potter, the majesty of magic, and Hogwarts, and Gringotts. I mean, all of these movies are reflections of society. But what I am is reality. And that's why I truth bomb the con. I'm Patrick Lovell, over and out. Onwards and upwards.